So before we jump into our watercolor painting today, I wanted to introduce you to Henrietta. She is one of our family's 8 chickens that we raised ourselves. We got the baby chicks maybe 3 years ago, and it has been so much fun to watch them grow and start producing fresh eggs. Now, I don't often do paintings with animals, but with Easter just right around the corner, I thought it would be really fun to paint a cute, fluffy little baby chick. And make sure you stick around to the end because there's one step to this painting that really makes it look realistic. So what are we waiting for? Let's go grab our paints and get started. So here I have my watercolor palette of paints, a paper towel. We also need some clean water and of course some watercolor paper. Now today I've cut my paper down to the size of 8 by 10, but I actually considered doing this as a card size instead. In the end, I decided to go ahead and do it larger just so it would be easier for you to see all of the details. But if you'd rather do a card size, then that is definitely okay too. Now I do have a little outline sketch for us to use today just to get us jump started into the painting. I'm going to have this outline available in my Etsy shop, both in the larger size as well as some card sizes. Then all you have to do is print out the outlines, trace it right onto your watercolor paper using a light table or even just a well-lit window in your house, and then you're all set to go. Now you're going to want to draw this really lightly with a pencil because the colors we're using today are going to be very light in value and you don't want the pencil marks to show too much. Some people like to even use watercolor pencils to do their outline sketches with so that those pencil lines kind of blend into the painting later. So you can try that if you'd like. Then of course we need some brushes. I think maybe I'll pull out the number 6 round and maybe the number 3 round. And I debated if I wanted to use the rigger brush for some thin lines today, but I actually think I can do it with just these two. We can always pull that out later if we need to. And just as a side note, I will put a link for these brushes as well as my Etsy shop and any of the other supplies that you see me using today in the description of this video if you'd like to look into anything further. All right, let's go ahead and tape our paper down with some artist tape and then we can get to painting. This just helps a little bit with the warping and it also helps me not move my painting out of the camera shot. I hope you liked catching a glimpse of my chicken Henrietta. If you'd like to see a little bit more footage, I will put some at the very end of the video, so make sure you check that out. Let's go ahead and pull out some colors onto our tray. We don't have a large selection that we need today. First, we're going to have a lighter, brighter hue of yellow. This is Azo yellow, and I will be watering it down just a little bit to keep it on that lighter value side. This color is going to be used for more of the highlighted areas of the baby chick. Then let's go ahead and pull out a darker, more rich yellow. This is Gamboge, but if you don't have this color, a medium cadmium yellow could work as well, or even a lighter yellow that's mixed with a touch of orange. This color is going to be for the mid-tones of the chick. And lastly, we need a darker hue for some shadows on the chick. So let's try pulling out some raw sienna. This is a lighter, warm, rich brown color. And I might even add a touch of cadmium orange into this just to keep it a little bit more cohesive with the yellow colors. This way it's not too brown. Okay, I think that's enough to get us started. Let's go ahead and rinse out our number 6 round brush, and then we're going to take some water and paint a layer of water on the head of the chick. We're going to be painting this chick wet on wet just to help these colors blend and spread really easily. I'm going to paint this water around the eyes and around the beak. We'll come back to those spots later. You need enough water on here to keep it nice and wet so that it doesn't dry out too fast, but you don't want so much that you're starting to get pools and puddles of water. Now that we have our water layer on here, we can start adding in the color. We'll work our way from the light colors to the dark colors. So let's start with some of that watered down light azo yellow. I'll start this color at the top of the head, moving down maybe to the sides of the head and along the cheeks of the chick. This is also the part where you can start adding in some smaller, more thin, fluffy brush strokes for little feather marks right around the outer edges of the chick. Okay, that is a pretty good start. Let's go ahead and move on to the second color, or the Gamboge. Now we're going to start filling this in some of the spaces that we didn't put the azo yellow. I'm going to start this along maybe the bottom of the head, around the neck, and under the beak, and then maybe I'll move it up through the left side of the head and a little bit around the eyes. Really, you can put this color wherever you feel like it looks good. The key with painting this chick today is that we need to work fairly quickly though. We want to drop these colors in so that they can begin spreading before that base water layer has started to dry out. If it starts to dry out too quickly, our paint colors are not going to spread and blend together very well. If it's not spreading very much on its own, you can wet and dry your brush off, then use the damp bristles to kind of push and spread that color around a little bit. Very good. Now let's add in the last bit of color, which is our shadow color. We don't need a ton of this in here. It doesn't need to be everywhere. I'm going to focus this mostly right under the beak, as well as on the sides of the eyes. I'm not using a lot of this brown color because we don't want to overpower the pretty warm yellows that we already have on here. We just need enough to give it a bit of shadow and dimension. It's also a good idea just to start out with a little bit of this color and see how it looks. And then if you need to, you can add in some more later and make it a little bit darker or stand out better. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't do animal paintings with the exception of maybe birds and butterflies, and I'm thinking of also trying a dragonfly sometime. But this cute little chick was a definite must try. I've drawn baby chicks with charcoal pencils before, but this is actually my very first chicken watercolor painting. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the tutorial so far. If you find you like my teaching and painting style, I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any of my new and upcoming weekly tutorials. Okay, now I have to admit, without having the eyes painted in here yet, it does kind of look like an evil chick right now, but just trust the process. The eyes are going to be the best addition in the end. They are going to really make this chick look realistic and really pop off the page. So just hang in there for just a minute more and let's let all of this dry a little bit, and then we can paint in the body of the chick next. If you want to take a break, you can let this dry naturally, or you can speed up the drying process by just using a hairdryer. All right, I think that the head is dry enough that we can go ahead and paint in the body of the chick next. The good news is that we are going to be painting this in pretty much the same way as the head. So let's take that number 6 round brush again and paint in the water in this area. Okay, very good. Now this is the part where we need to work a little bit more quickly so that we can get all of this paint in here and blending together before it starts to dry. So let's go ahead and take some of the light watered down azo yellow and paint in the highlighted areas first. The upper body of the chick is going to be the more highlighted and lighter portion, and the bottom part is going to be darker in value. So we do have that little pencil line that kind of goes through the center or midway point of the chick's body. That's going to be kind of our cutoff guide. Okay, now let's take some of the Gamboge and begin adding and blending that in here. I'll start this around the neck of the chick and maybe down the wing a little bit, and then I'll bring some more color back in here and add some of it through the middle upper body section as well. Very good. Now let's take some of the gamboge and begin painting that a little bit more heavily on the bottom half of the chick, underneath those midline pencil marks. The bottom half of the chick is going to be darker in value than the upper half. And as you start painting along the edges, take the tip of the brush and paint in some really small, thin strokes along the edges just to create that fluffy, hair-like look of the chick's fluff. I think I might need to add a little bit more of this gamboge right here in the center of the chick while all this is still wet. Okay, working quickly still, let's go ahead and take a touch of the brown color now and add that a little bit into the shadow spots of the chick, especially right under the neck, right under the wing, and within that bottom half area. My paint is starting to dry just a little bit, so we do need to work quickly. And don't forget that if you do need a little bit of help spreading that color, you can always wet and dry your brush off and use the damp bristles to soften or spread or blend those colors around. All right, let's go ahead and either let this dry naturally or pull out that hair dryer once again and dry this space off a little bit quicker, and then we can move on to the next step. Okay, now this is the point where you actually have to make a decision. You can leave this chick just as it is if you like the more soft, subtle, fluffy look, or if you'd like, you can add in a little bit of extra detail. You can take the smaller #3 round brush and just a touch of paint and actually add in a few thin lines of color to emphasize some of the shadows or even the look of feather marks. I like it either way, it just kind of depends on what you want to do. If you do choose to add in some thin marks in here, I recommend not doing very many. I really didn't do any on the head at all, mostly just on the body portion, especially along the edges and the shadows to really emphasize that darker color a little bit better. The only place that I might say to add some thin lines on the head would be off to the sides of the eyes, almost like little eyelashes. Now, I know chickens don't really have eyelashes, but for this painting, for that cute chick look, we can get away with it. Anyway, not too many, not too dark, just a fun, subtle little accent. Okay, I'm going to let that sit and dry a little bit, but while we wait, let's go ahead and paint in the shadow underneath the chick's feet. I'm going to pull out a little bit of ultramarine blue to help with this. This color can be a little bit more watered down. It doesn't need to be too dark or even too vibrant. I'll paint the shadow wet on wet as well, so we'll take a touch of water first and paint in the area, carefully going around the chick's feet. Then after I have the water on here, I'll actually take just a touch of the Gamboge or even the raw sienna and paint a little bit of orangey color around the outer edges of this shadow. Then I'll use the ultramarine blue for the center of the shadow, moving and spreading it outward, even blending it into that outer orange color. When the blue and the orange mix and blend together, it is going to create sort of a greenish brown color, but that's okay. It just adds to the look of the shadow. That looks pretty good, but I do feel like I need a slightly darker touch of blue in the center of the shadow here. So I might add just a touch of Payne's gray into my ultramarine blue and then add that in really quickly before the shadow area dries. All right, very good. Believe it or not, we are actually almost done with this. We just have the final finishing touches that really make this chick pop and come to life. So let's mix up a color that we can use for the chick's beak and the feet next. I'll take some cadmium orange and mix it with just a touch of cadmium red to create sort of a red-orange color. Maybe I'll start with the chick's beak first using the wet on wet technique. So I'll go ahead and wet down the small section with water and then I can start dropping in the color. I might even water down just a portion of this red-orange color just a little bit so it's not too vibrant. We can always add in more color later if we need to, but I'm going to start painting in this red-orange color using the number 3 round brush just right on the edges of the very sides of the beak. I'm going to leave the center of the beak without any color to create more of a highlight there. Then I'll take a touch of the raw sienna and add that on the very edges of the beak as well, just to create a bit more of a darker shadow look. And if you ever find that the paint starts to seep or bleed into that highlight part of the beak, then just wet and dry your brush off and swipe off some of that color. We really need to keep that highlight there in the center. All right, let's go ahead and paint in the feet of the chick next. Now, I don't think we even need to use the wet on wet technique for this one. I'm just going to go ahead and take some of that red-orange color and paint in the entire foot with this color. Then I'll come back in here with some raw sienna and add in some touches of shadow while that red-orange is still wet. Now earlier you may have noticed I only painted in the main portion of the beak. I had a small section of the bottom beak left, so I'll just take a touch of raw sienna and finish painting that section in as well. And I will also add in the dots or the holes on top of the beak too. If you'd like to add a little bit of extra detail to the feet, you can also use some of that raw sienna and just paint some really thin, small lines along the foot just to give it a little extra texture. Okay, very good. Now we are coming to my very favorite part of this painting, the eyes. And like I said, right now this kind of looks like an evil little chick until we add in the eyes. But trust me, these cute little eyes will make all the difference in the world, and they are not hard to do at all. So let's pull out some Payne's Gray onto our tray that we can use for the eyes. And all I'm going to do is take a touch of this color, and using the number 3 round brush, I'll paint in the full shape of the eye, going around 2 little highlighted dots. This is not wet on wet. I'm just putting the paint right on here. Now we're going to come back in here in just a little bit and do a really fun trick that makes these eyes look realistic and pop off the page. But we do need to let this sit and dry before we can do that. So let's go ahead and move on to the other eye and paint it in the same way. Okay, now I want the eyes to be really nice and dry before we do the trick that makes them look realistic. So while we let those finish drying, maybe I'll take a touch of burnt umber and just mix it into some of this Payne's Gray, and then add in some really thin lines alongside the chick's eyes, again kind of like little eyelashes, just to add to the cuteness. There doesn't need to be a lot of these. They don't need to be too dark, just keep them fairly subtle. All right, I think the eyes are now dry enough that we can do our fun little trick. So all I'm going to do is wet and dry my brush off, and then take my damp brush and use the very tip of the bristles. I'm going to paint a line of water close to the bottom of the eye, not clear along the edge, just close to it. Then I'll use my paper towel and dab off the excess color and water, and voila, we have the perfect little soft, subtle highlight. This technique just gives these eyes a really three-dimensional look, and it really makes them pop off the page instead of just being flat and almost black in color. If you need to, you can go over this 2 or 3 times to make it even lighter, but again, I wouldn't overdo it. This can be fairly subtle. But isn't this amazing? I just love how the eyes of this chick turned out, and it doesn't look evil anymore, so that is a plus. Now, when your painting is completely dry, you can come back in with a good eraser and try to erase any of the leftover pencil lines that you might still be able to see. I still have some pencil lines on here that didn't erase very well, but they are pretty subtle, and it usually doesn't bother me too much. But my friends, I think that is it for our cute little chick painting today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you a very happy Easter weekend. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had some fun and maybe even learned something new. If you did enjoy this tutorial, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side. Here's a few more of our chickens. One is still in the coop, but here's 7 of them. We've got Henrietta that you met earlier, and we have Black Panther, Flower, Nugget. My husband thought that would be a funny name, Chicken Nugget, as well as Stir Fry. Those were his ideas. And then we also have Chip and Spot. How many did I say? Anyway, here's our cute little chickens. Nice to let them out of the coop in the warm sunshine now that winter is over.